Nowadays, happiness is more than just a feeling. I mean, there's so much of hype around happiness and so much talk about it these days that it can get kind of a bit too overwhelming. The neighboring country of Bhutan even has a gross national happiness index on the lines of the GDP or gross domestic product. There's so many international organizations, including United Nations, that take out annual, yearly happiness indexes. The Global Happiness Index, I guess, which is taken out by the United Nations, measures, happiness of countries, ranks countries on the basis of, the happiness of their people, and the happiness is ranked on certain parameters like the quality of living, standard of life, how developed a country is, what is the extent of the economic development, what kind of infrastructure do people have, things like that. Although to be honest, as a journalist, as a TV journalist, I've done a lot of stories on these global happiness indexes, and I think these should be taken with a pinch of salt, because happiness, after all, I think is something so abstract that it is difficult to, measure happiness on the basis of these simplistic quantitative parameters. I mean, most of these indexes, in fact, the Global Happiness Index 2022, the topmost countries, if you see the rankings, the topmost countries are the Nordic countries, Sweden, Norway, Finland, obviously because the standard of living is the highest in these countries, and India ranks pretty low, on some 130th number or something in these rankings. But if you look at the, other data, Nordic countries have one of the highest suicide rates in the world, and people there are generally considered as depressed. So there's obviously quite a bit of contradiction out there. But I mean, anyhow, the discussion on the validity of these happiness indexes can go on and on. But today in this video, I'm going to give you 5 happiness books to read. I'm going to recommend you 5 happiness books to read in 2023. The first book that I'm going to recommend you is The Happiness Project by Gretchen Rubin. Now, The Happiness Project is a rather interesting book that is based on an experiment conducted by the author Gretchen Rubin, and she essentially talks about the experiment in the book. Now, in this experiment, she gives herself a 12-month period, a 1-year period. And in each month of this 12-month period, she selects a particular area of her life, a particular aspect of her life, and then concentrates on improving that aspect to optimize happiness. So for example, in the first month of this project, she chooses energy. So the concentration is on, she tries to concentrate on how to maximize her energy levels, how to have, optimal energy levels, so that obviously, she can increase the quality of happiness in her life. So she focuses on doing a number of small tasks regularly, for example, on getting enough sleep, on decluttering her mind, on not concentrating on useless tasks, taking all useless tasks out of her life chart and focusing on other things like, getting a lot of exercise, eating nutritious food and all that. So this is the first month where she's focusing on improving her energy levels, like I said. And as we all know, the more energy a person has, the more vitality they have in terms of, the synchronization between their physical health and their mental health. And obviously, the happier a person will be. Then the second month, she focuses on her married life, on improving her married life and on sorting out, the problems and issues with her marriage. Then one particular month, she would focus on her work life. That is, she would deal with all the issues, that are cluttering or affecting her work life, and thus try to maximize happiness by that. So I think this is a very interesting concept, a rather interesting experiment. I don't know for sure if, you can increase happiness in your life by these practical methods, by these kind of experiments or not. But I would say this is certainly a book worth reading. And this is an experiment certainly worth trying out in your own life. I mean, you don't have to go buy the book completely. You can just take some tips from the book and then create your own 12-month happiness experiment. The second happiness book I'm going to recommend you guys is The Art of Happiness by Dalai Lama. Now guys, whenever you see Dalai Lama's face on the TV screen or in newspapers, on the internet, anywhere else, you see this kind of sublime smile on his countenance, which is pretty much different from, the kind of smile that you or I have. The level of contentment and happiness that you see in that level, it's just sublime. It's just otherworldly. Now, obviously, that is partly because he's the Dalai Lama and you or I cannot, even aspire to the levels of spirituality that he has attained. So obviously we cannot have the same level of contentment and happiness, but maybe we can aspire to that level and get some percentage of that enigmatic smile. So this book by Dalai Lama tells you that you can do precisely the same. The Art of Happiness is actually co-written by Dalai Lama along with a Western psychiatrist, and it's in the format of an interview between the Dalai Lama and the psychiatrist. So the psychiatrist is asking, a lot of questions about life, happiness, and existence to the Dalai Lama, and the Dalai Lama is essentially answering these questions. The book is in a very storytelling animated format where throughout these answers, the Dalai Lama is revealing the wisdom of life, He's revealing the secrets of eternal happiness, eternal bliss and fulfillment, of course, taking, elements from the traditional Tibetan philosophy. So I do not want to reveal much about the contents of this book because I want you guys to read it for yourself. Like I said, it's one of the cult happiness books. It's in fact one of the earliest books in the genre of happiness literature. The third book I'm going to recommend you to read is The Happiness Hypothesis by Jonathan Haidt. The Happiness Hypothesis is a rather scientifically written book. It even gives you a formula to measure the percentage of happiness in your life. Now, the happiness hypothesis, in this book, the author believes that the brain has two parts. One part of the brain deals with our irrational desires, the sensory experiences, and all the irrational impulses that we have. And the other part is the rational and the conscious part of the brain, which deals with, the rational decision-making part. Now, this is, of course, a very basic psychological principle, which we all are aware of. But what the author does new here is that his hypothesis gives a name to these two different parts of the brain. The irrational part of the brain he calls the elephant, and the rational part of the brain he calls the rider. So the author then says that any lack of happiness in a person is a result of lack of coordination between the rider and the elephant, which is kind of interesting. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense logically and scientifically. So the book is essentially it takes 10, big ideas, 10 concrete ideas from major civilizations across the world, and each chapter is devoted to analyzing one idea and interpreting that idea scientifically, putting it in the modern context, and how you can use that idea to maximize the quality of happiness in your life. So again, I think a very different kind of a book, a very different take on happiness, and a must-read book. The fourth book I'd like to recommend is The Little Book of Luca, Secrets of the World's Happiest People by Mike Viking. Now, Luca is a Danish word. Mike Viking is a Danish author, and he's written this book. So Luca is essentially a Danish word, which in English roughly translates into happiness. But in the Danish language, it means an entire way of life. So this is a very hands-on book, which is actually giving you concrete tips and tricks on how to, be happy, how to be more happy in your life rather, and how to increase the quality of happiness in your life. So these are, like I said, so many practical tips which you can actually implement in your real life, like being more generous to others. You can increase your happiness by doing charity, by spending more time with your loved ones, by taking out more time, for hobbies, activities, so pampering yourself, and by finding the time out to, develop sort of meaningful interpersonal relationships and associations. So I can go on and on with these tips. Some of these tips, like I said, are quite commonsensical, which we already know of. But, in the humdrum of daily existence, we do not pay attention to these things. But some of the tips are quite unconventional and interesting. So I would say it's a must-read book if you want to know the secrets of the Danish way of being happy. The final book I'd like to recommend you guys is Ikigai, the Japanese Secret to a Long and Happy Life. Now, I think most of you would have heard about this book by now because last year this book was just, becoming so famous and doing the rounds of all the top book leading charts. To be honest, initially I was a bit skeptical about, whether I should include Ikigai in this list or not, because it's not really a happiness book per se. It's more about, changing your entire lifestyle. But then I thought, what is happiness ultimately? Happiness is not just about, the external manifestation of, pleasure or a certain well-being, but it's about, a complete overhaul of your, internal beings as well. And it's about the complete balance of your internal and external self. So I thought I should definitely recommend this book. Now, Ikigai in Japanese again means a kind of way of life. So the book is delving into the science of ancient Japanese rituals and bringing them into the modern context, reinterpreting them in the modern context, and giving you tips on how to incorporate these Japanese rituals in your daily life to optimize your physical and mental well-being. And happiness is ultimately all about vitality, a kind of vitality which, like I said, is an optimum is an optimum combination of your physical well-being and mental well-being. So it's not as simplistic as you just decide one fine day you want to be happy and then you're happy. No, it's not as simple as that. You cannot be happy until and unless your physical being and mental being are at peace with each other. So this book, I think, does a lot of justice to that concept by giving you tips on how to take care of yourself physically, mentally, and emotionally, and ultimately lead a more happy and peaceful existence. So guys, that's it for today, and thank you so much for listening. I hope listening about these books made you a bit happy and you're going to try out reading at least some of these books. If you like the content, please do press the like button, and please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.